There are moments when a person discovers that the burden they have been carrying is heavier than their strength. Every calculation fails. Every certainty collapses. The future becomes a place the mind can no longer enter with confidence. Yet, hidden within the spiritual heritage of Islam is a phrase that was never meant to be spoken casually. Ibn Arabi saw in Hasbiyallahu Wa Ni'mal Wakeel more than comfort. He saw a profound shift in reality itself. The moment a heart truly entrusts its affair to Allah, a door begins to open that cannot be unlocked by effort, strategy, or control. Most people repeat these words without realizing what stands behind them. Tonight, we uncover the forgotten secret of Hasbiyallahu Wa Ni'mal Wakeel and the extraordinary door that opens when reliance upon Allah becomes complete. The sentence that changes, who carries the burden. There are moments in life when a person realizes that the weight they are carrying is no longer something they can manage through effort alone. The mind continues searching for solutions, yet every possibility seems incomplete. The heart moves from one concern to another, trying to secure an outcome that remains beyond its reach. Sleep becomes occupied by unfinished questions. The future becomes crowded with uncertainties. Even when the body rests, the burden continues its work within the soul. Many people believe that their suffering comes entirely from the difficulty standing before them. Yet, there is another source of exhaustion that often remains hidden. It is the exhausting attempt to carry responsibilities that were never meant to rest entirely upon human shoulders. A person begins treating every outcome as though it depends completely upon their own ability to control it. They feel responsible not only for their actions but also for results they cannot command. They worry about tomorrow before tomorrow arrives. They rehearse possibilities that may never occur. They carry fears about events that remain unseen. The burden grows heavier because it is being carried by someone too small to hold it. This is where the secret of Hasbiyallahu Wa Ni'mal Wakeel begins revealing itself. Ibn Arabi understood that certain sacred words are not merely statements spoken by the tongue. They are entrances into a different state of awareness. Their true power emerges when the heart begins living inside their meaning. When a servant says, Hasbiyallahu Wa Ni'mal Wakeel with genuine understanding, something profound begins changing within them. The phrase does not merely describe Allah. It redefines the relationship between the servant and their burden. Before those words become real, the person sees themselves as the primary carrier of every concern. Their mind remains occupied with holding everything together. They feel trapped between responsibility and fear. They become exhausted trying to secure outcomes that belong to the unseen. Yet, hidden inside this phrase is a transfer. The burden does not disappear immediately. The circumstances may remain exactly as they are. The unanswered questions may still exist. But the identity of the one carrying those concerns begins changing. The servant slowly recognizes that Allah never asked them to control what belongs only to Him. They were asked to act. They were asked to strive. They were asked to remain sincere. But they were never asked to carry the weight of the decree itself. This realization creates a transformation far deeper than ordinary comfort. Comfort often comes from believing that circumstances will improve. The reality awakened by Hasbiyallahu Wa Ni'mal Wakeel comes from recognizing that Allah remains sufficient regardless of what circumstances are doing. A person who truly enters this state stops measuring safety by visible conditions alone. Their confidence begins moving away from outcomes and toward the one who controls outcomes. They no longer feel compelled to hold every thread of the future in their hands because they recognize that those threads never belonged there. Ibn Arabi frequently wrote about the illusion of ownership that quietly enters the human heart. People begin treating life as though they possess authority over matters that remain entirely within divine knowledge. They attempt to manage realities they cannot see. They become anxious about pathways they cannot predict. This creates an endless cycle of tension, because the servant is trying to occupy a position that belongs only to Allah. The phrase, Hasbiyallahu Wa Ni'mal Wakeel, gently dissolves that illusion. It reminds the soul that there is a guardian greater than its calculations. There is a protector greater than its plans. There is a wisdom greater than its understanding. Something remarkable begins happening. The person still takes action. They still fulfill responsibilities. They still pursue what is good and beneficial. Yet the emotional burden attached to those efforts begins loosening. Their actions remain, but the desperate attachment to controlling every result begins fading. This is why the phrase has comforted hearts across generations. Its power does not come from magical words. Its power comes from the reality those words reveal. The servant discovers that they are not standing alone before life's uncertainties. The future is not resting upon their shoulders. The outcome is not dependent upon their ability to predict every possibility. Allah is sufficient. Allah is the one entrusted with the affair. Allah is the one who sees what remains hidden. When this understanding settles into the heart, the burden itself begins feeling different. The difficulty may still exist, but it no longer occupies the same place within the soul. The servant has stopped carrying it alone. This is the secret hidden within the sentence. The phrase changes more than emotions. It changes ownership. What was once carried by a worried heart is gradually entrusted to divine care. And in that transfer, a door begins opening that many people spend their entire lives searching for, without realizing it was hidden within these words all along. The moment Allah becomes enough. There is a profound difference between believing that Allah is sufficient and experiencing the reality of His sufficiency within the depths of the heart. Many people affirm this truth with sincerity. They know it through faith. They accept it through knowledge. Yet there comes a point in the spiritual journey when this understanding moves beyond thought and becomes a living reality. The heart begins seeing the world differently because its relationship with Allah has changed. This transformation rarely begins during periods of ease. It often emerges when a person reaches a place where every other source of certainty begins, losing its stability. Expectations fail, plans collapse. People who seem dependable reveal their limitations. The future becomes impossible to predict. The servant gradually discovers that everything they once leaned upon possesses boundaries. Human beings spend much of their lives seeking security through created things. They seek it through wealth, relationships, reputation, opportunities, and carefully designed plans. None of these things are inherently wrong. Allah places blessings within creation, and those blessings have value. The difficulty begins when the heart expects from creation what only Allah can provide. A person may possess resources yet remain anxious. They may possess companionship yet still feel lonely. They may possess opportunities yet continue fearing the future. They may achieve what they once desired and still discover an emptiness they cannot explain. This happens because the deepest needs of the soul cannot be fully satisfied by temporary things. Creation can support the journey, but it cannot become the final source of peace. The heart continues searching because it was created for something greater than dependence upon changing circumstances. Ibn Arabi often described the spiritual path as a gradual unveiling. The servant begins seeing realities that were always present but previously hidden behind distractions and attachments. Among the greatest of these unveilings is the realization that Allah's sufficiency is not merely a theological concept. It is a reality capable of transforming the way a person experiences existence itself. When Allah becomes enough, the heart no longer treats every uncertainty as a threat. It begins understanding that its security does not originate from controlling outcomes. The future remains unseen, yet the fear surrounding the future begins losing its dominance. Circumstances continue changing, yet the heart discovers a stability that is not dependent upon those changes. This does not mean the servant stops caring about their responsibilities. It does not mean they become indifferent to hardship. Rather, their center of reliance shifts. They stop demanding that creation provide what only Allah can provide. Many people spend years seeking reassurance from the world. They want guarantees that cannot be given. They want certainty about events that have not yet occurred. They want promises from people who themselves are subject to uncertainty. This search never truly ends because the world was not created to offer absolute security. The moment Allah becomes enough, the search begins quieting. The servant still hopes, they still plan, they still strive. Yet beneath all of these activities lies a deeper awareness. Their confidence is no longer rooted primarily in what they possess. It is rooted in the one who possesses all things. This awareness creates a remarkable freedom within the soul. The person becomes less controlled by fear of loss, because they recognize that Allah remains even when circumstances change. They become less dependent upon constant approval, because their worth is no longer measured entirely through the opinions of others. They become less anxious about the future, because they trust the wisdom of the one who already knows it. Ibn Arabi viewed this state as a form of spiritual wealth. It is a richness that does not depend upon material abundance. A person may possess little in the eyes of the world and still experience immense inner sufficiency. Another may possess much and remain inwardly restless because their heart has not yet discovered where true sufficiency resides. The phrase Hasbiyallahu Wa Ni'mal Wakeel points directly toward this mystery. It invites the servant into a relationship where Allah is no longer treated as one support among many. He becomes the foundation beneath every support. He becomes the reality that remains constant while everything else changes. The heart begins releasing demands it once placed upon the world. It no longer expects temporary things to fulfill eternal needs. It no longer requires perfect circumstances in order to experience peace. It no longer waits for every question to be answered before trusting Allah. Something quieter and stronger emerges, a certainty that does not depend upon visible evidence, a trust that survives uncertainty, a contentment that remains present even when life unfolds differently than expected. This is the moment Allah becomes enough, not because every difficulty disappears, not because every desire is fulfilled immediately, but because the heart discovers a source of stability greater than any difficulty and more enduring than any desire. The servant begins realizing that the greatest gift hidden within reliance is not simply the resolution of problems. It is the awakening of a heart that no longer believes it must find its security in fragile things. Allah becomes enough, and through that realization, the soul enters a freedom that cannot be purchased, negotiated, or achieved through worldly means alone. It is a freedom born from knowing that what truly sustains you has never depended upon the changing conditions of life. It has always been connected to the one whose sufficiency has no limit and whose care has never been absent, even during the moments when it seemed hidden from sight. The secret passage between helplessness and certainty. There is a place in the spiritual journey that few people recognize while they are passing through it. It is neither the place of complete confusion nor the place of complete certainty. It exists between the two. It is the narrow passage through which the soul travels when it can no longer depend upon its own strength but has not yet fully arrived at the peace of trust. This passage is often uncomfortable because it strips away familiar forms of security while asking the heart to move toward a reality it cannot yet see. Many people encounter this stage during moments of profound difficulty. They reach a point where effort alone no longer seems capable of solving the problem before them. The strategies that once provided confidence lose their effectiveness. The answers they expected fail to appear. The future becomes impossible to organize according to personal plans. The person finds themselves standing before a horizon covered by uncertainty. This experience feels like a weakness. The individual becomes aware of how little control they truly possess. They discover limits they previously ignored. They realize that much of life remains beyond their ability to direct. For the ego, this realization can be deeply unsettling because the ego prefers the feeling of mastery. It wants to believe that every outcome can be secured through enough effort, intelligence, or preparation. Yet Ibn Arabi saw something extraordinary hidden within this moment. He understood that helplessness is not always a sign of failure. Sometimes it is the beginning of a deeper vision. As long as a person remains convinced that they are sufficient unto themselves, their attention remains fixed upon their own power. They continue looking toward personal ability as the primary source of security. Only when those assumptions begin breaking apart does the heart become capable of discovering a different foundation. The passage between helplessness and certainty begins when a person stops pretending that they possess control over realities that belong to Allah alone. This does not mean abandoning responsibility. It does not mean refusing to act. Rather, it means recognizing the boundaries of human authority. The servant continues striving while understanding that results remain within divine knowledge. They continue moving forward while accepting that the future cannot be possessed in advance. This recognition creates an inner shift. At first, the person feels exposed because familiar supporters are no longer providing the reassurance they once offered. Yet gradually another form of awareness begins emerging. The soul starts recognizing that its helplessness does not exist in isolation. The realization of weakness is accompanied by the realization of divine strength. The two discoveries arrive together. The servant learns who they are. They begin learning who Allah is. Ibn Arabi often described spiritual growth as a process of unveiling. Certain truths remain hidden until other illusions are removed. A person cannot fully appreciate divine sufficiency while still believing they are self-sufficient. They cannot fully understand reliance while imagining they can carry every burden alone. The passage through helplessness becomes necessary because it clears away false assumptions that prevent deeper certainty from entering. This is why the phrase Hasbiyallahu Wa Ni'mal Wakeel carries such profound significance during difficult times. It is not merely spoken after certainty arrives. It helps create the conditions through which certainty becomes possible. The person begins repeating the words while still feeling uncertainty. They repeat them while questions remain unanswered. They repeat them while outcomes remain unseen. The heart starts absorbing what the tongue has been saying. A different relationship with uncertainty begins developing. The unseen future remains unknown, yet it no longer feels empty. The person starts recognizing that uncertainty does not mean absence. The hidden remains hidden, yet Allah remains present within the hidden. The path remains invisible, yet divine guidance remains active. This realization creates the bridge between helplessness and certainty. Certainty does not emerge because every question receives an answer. It emerges because the heart becomes anchored to something deeper than answers. The servant discovers that confidence in Allah can exist even while circumstances remain unresolved. This is a very different kind of certainty from the one most people seek. Ordinary certainty depends upon information. Spiritual certainty depends upon trust. Ordinary certainty requires knowing what will happen. Spiritual certainty rests upon knowing who holds what will happen. The first can disappear whenever circumstances change. The second remains because its foundation is not circumstantial at all. As the servant continues moving through this passage, something remarkable occurs. The helplessness that once felt frightening begins losing its power. It no longer appears as evidence of vulnerability alone. It becomes a doorway through which deeper knowledge enters the heart. The person starts seeing that their limitations were not obstacles to divine nearness. They were invitations to it. Their inability to control everything was not a punishment. It was a lesson. Their uncertainty was not abandonment. It was a path. And at the end of that path waits for a certainty unlike anything the world can provide. Not certainty about every event, not certainty about every outcome, but certainty that Allah remains sufficient even when understanding remains incomplete. This is the secret passage that Ibn Arabi pointed toward. It is crossed whenever a servant stops demanding security from their own power and begins finding security in Allah. The journey begins in helplessness because the heart must first recognize its limits. Yet, if the servant continues walking with sincerity, the same passage eventually opens into a certainty that could never have been reached through strength alone. The burden becomes lighter, the fear becomes quieter, the trust becomes deeper, and the heart discovers that what seemed like the end of its resources was actually the beginning of a more profound reliance than it had ever known before. What leaves the heart? When reliance truly arrives, many people imagine that reliance upon Allah is something that adds new qualities to the heart. They think of it as receiving strength, gaining peace, or developing trust. While all of these things are true, Ibn Arabi pointed toward another dimension of reliance that is often less discussed. The arrival of true reliance is not only about what enters the heart, it is also about what quietly departs from it. The heart is not an empty space. Throughout life, it becomes filled with assumptions, fears, expectations, attachments, and countless invisible burdens. Some of these burdens arrive so gradually that a person no longer notices their presence. They begin treating them as natural parts of themselves. They assume that constant worry is normal. They assume that inattention is unavoidable. They assume that carrying the weight of every possible future is simply part of being responsible. Yet when reliance upon Allah begins taking root in a deeper way, certain things start losing their place within the soul. The first thing that begins leaving is the belief that every outcome must be secured through personal control. This belief often hides beneath ordinary thinking. A person feels compelled to predict every possibility. They continuously rehearse future scenarios. They become trapped inside mental negotiations with events that have not yet occurred. The mind remains busy because it imagines that enough thought can somehow create safety. Reliance slowly loosens this habit. The servant begins recognizing that no amount of anticipation can possess tomorrow before it arrives. They continue planning and acting responsibly, but the desperate need to control every possibility begins fading. The heart learns that vigilance is not the same as trust, and that endless calculation is not the same as wisdom. Another thing that quietly leaves the heart is the constant demand for certainty from the world. Many people spend years searching for guarantees. They want relationships that can never disappoint them. They want opportunities that can never fail. They want futures that can never change. The problem is not that they desire stability. The problem is that they seek absolute security from things that were never created to provide it. When reliance deepens, the servant begins releasing this demand. They stop asking temporary things to behave like eternal things. They stop expecting creation to provide what only Allah can provide. As this expectation weakens, a surprising spaciousness emerges within the soul. The person becomes less shaken by changes because they are no longer placing ultimate confidence in what changes. Ibn Arabi often described the heart as a mirror. Whatever dominates the heart influences what that mirror reflects. When fear dominates, the world appears threatening. When attachment dominates, loss appears unbearable. When anxiety dominates, the future appears overwhelming. Reliance changes the condition of the mirror itself. As trust in Allah grows, certain distortions begin disappearing. The heart becomes less occupied with imagined disasters. It becomes less fascinated by worst-case scenarios. It becomes less willing to surrender its peace to possibilities that exist only inside fearful speculation. This transformation does not happen through force. The servant does not wake up one morning completely free of concern. Rather, the heart gradually discovers that many of its worries were sustained by assumptions rather than realities. There is another burden that often leaves when reliance truly arrives. It is the burden of carrying responsibility for matters that belong entirely to Allah. Human beings are entrusted with effort. They are entrusted with sincerity. They are entrusted with obedience. But they are not entrusted with controlling the decree. Yet many people unconsciously place this responsibility upon themselves. They judge their worth according to outcomes they cannot command. They blame themselves for realities beyond their reach. They carry guilt for things they were never meant to control. Reliance begins correcting this imbalance. The servant learns to distinguish between what belongs to them and what belongs to Allah. Their responsibility becomes clearer. Their limitations become clearer. Their role becomes clearer. And with this clarity comes relief. Not because life becomes easier, but because the heart stops carrying obligations that were never assigned to it. Perhaps the most profound thing that leaves the heart is the illusion that it stands alone before life's difficulties. This illusion appears in subtle forms. A person may believe in Allah sincerely while still feeling as though they must face every challenge by themselves. They behave as though divine support is a distant idea rather than an active reality. When reliance matures, this feeling begins dissolving. The servant starts recognizing that every situation unfolds beneath Allah's knowledge. Every difficulty exists within His wisdom. Every uncertainty remains visible to him, even when it remains hidden from everyone else. This awareness changes the emotional texture of life. The person still encounters hardship. They still experience loss. They still face unanswered questions. Yet they no longer feel abandoned inside those experiences. Ibn Arabi saw true reliance as a transformation of perception. The world itself may remain unchanged, but the heart begins seeing it through a different lens. The fears that once dominated become smaller. The demands that once exhausted become quieter. The burdens that once seemed inseparable from existence begin falling away one by one. What remains is not passivity. What remains is not indifference. What remains is a heart that continues acting, striving, and living while resting upon a foundation deeper than circumstances. The servant discovers that reliance is not merely trusting Allah to change a situation. It is allowing Allah to remove from the heart everything that prevents trust from fully arriving. And when those hidden burdens finally depart, the soul experiences a freedom that does not come from possessing control. It comes from no longer needing it. The heart becomes lighter, not because life has become simpler, but because it has learned where its true support has always been. The mystery of being carried through what you cannot cross. There are experiences in life that seem too large for the strength a person possesses at the moment they first encounter them. The challenge appears greater than their patience. The loss appears greater than their endurance. The uncertainty appears greater than their understanding. When standing before such realities, many people quietly ask themselves a question they rarely speak aloud. They wonder how they will survive what lies ahead. They do not ask how they will succeed or how they will triumph. They simply wonder how they will make it through. The future begins looking like a vast distance that cannot be crossed. The mind examines the road ahead, and becomes discouraged because it tries to carry the entire journey at once. It looks at months that have not yet arrived. It imagines difficulties that have not yet unfolded. It measures its current strength against future burdens and concludes that the task is impossible. Yet this conclusion contains a hidden misunderstanding. Human beings often assume they must cross tomorrow with today's strength. They imagine that the resources available to them in the present moment are all they will ever possess. Ibn Arabi's teachings point toward a very different reality. He understood that Allah's support is not given all at once at the beginning of the journey. It arrives according to the unfolding of the journey itself. The servant is not expected to carry the future before the future arrives. They are given what is needed as each step appears. This is why many people look back upon periods they once considered impossible and find themselves unable to explain how they survived them. The grief was real, the hardship was real, the confusion was real. Yet somehow they were carried through experiences that seemed unbearable when viewed from a distance. When they stood at the beginning, they could not imagine reaching the other side. Yet one day they discover that the crossing has already happened. Ibn Arabi saw within this mystery a profound sign of divine care. The servant often believes they are moving forward through personal strength alone. They assume that endurance belongs entirely to them. They credit themselves for surviving difficult seasons. Yet beneath their effort exists a support that remains largely unseen. There are forms of assistance that do not announce themselves. A sudden patience during a difficult conversation, a moment of calm in the middle of uncertainty, a wisdom that appears precisely when confusion reaches its peak, a resilience that emerges from a place the person never knew existed. These gifts arrive quietly. Because they arrive quietly, people often overlook them. Yet without them, the journey would become impossible. This is part of the mystery hidden inside Hasbiyallahu Wa Ni'mal Wakeel. The phrase is not merely a declaration that Allah will remove every difficulty. Sometimes the difficulty remains. Sometimes the crossing must still take place. The deeper secret is that Allah becomes the one who carries the servant through the crossing. The person continues walking. The person continues striving. The person continues enduring. Yet the strength sustaining those efforts is no longer viewed as originating entirely from themselves. A profound shift begins occurring in the heart. Instead of asking, "How will I survive this?" the servant gradually begins asking, "How will Allah guide me through this?" The situation may appear similar from the outside, but the inner reality has changed completely. The first question isolates the person inside their own limitations. The second places the journey inside divine care. Ibn Arabi frequently described human existence as a continual dependence upon Allah, whether people recognize it or not. Every breath, every heartbeat, every moment of awareness is sustained through a generosity that never pauses. Most of the time, this dependence remains hidden because life feels manageable. Difficulty reveals it. When a person reaches a place they cannot cross through personal ability alone, they begin encountering the truth of their dependence more directly. This realization can feel uncomfortable because it challenges the illusion of self-sufficiency. Yet as reliance deepens, the discomfort gives way to something beautiful. The servant begins noticing how many times help arrived without being requested in a specific form. How many times protection appeared through events they initially misunderstood. How many times strength arrived exactly when it was needed and not a moment earlier. How many times they were supported by mercies they never saw while they were receiving them. The journey starts looking different. The road is no longer viewed as a test of personal power. It becomes a testimony to divine support. Even the memories of past hardships begin changing. The person realizes that they were never carrying those burdens alone. Allah was sustaining them through every stage, even when they felt abandoned by their own understanding. This awareness creates a remarkable peace. The servant no longer needs to possess certainty about every future challenge. They no longer need detailed explanations for every upcoming difficulty. Their confidence shifts away from the road itself and toward the one who governs the road. The crossing may still be difficult. The distance may still be long. The answers may still remain hidden, yet the heart becomes anchored in a new understanding. If Allah carried me through what I could not imagine surviving before, then His support is not limited by what stands before me now. This is the mystery that many people discover only after the journey is complete. They spend years focusing on the obstacles they crossed, while overlooking the one who carried them across. Hasbiyallahu Wa Ni'mal Wakeel invites the servant to recognize that reality before the crossing is finished. It teaches the heart that divine sufficiency is not only revealed when the difficulty disappears. It is revealed through the hidden support that allows the servant to continue moving even when the road appears impossible. A profound trust begins emerging. The person may not know how they will reach the other side, but they no longer believe that reaching the other side depends entirely upon them. They understand that the one who brought them to the edge of the crossing is also capable of carrying them through it, step by step, mercy by mercy, until the journey reveals a destination they once thought was beyond reach. The hidden language of divine sufficiency. There are forms of communication that do not depend upon words. A mother understands the condition of her child before a sentence is spoken. A close friend notices a change in someone's heart before it is expressed aloud. In the same way, spiritual life contains meanings that are not always delivered through direct explanations. Allah teaches, guides, reassures, and transforms through a language that often remains invisible to those who are looking only for obvious signs. Ibn Arabi frequently reflected upon the countless ways divine wisdom speaks through existence. He did not see the world as a collection of disconnected events. He saw it as a living display of meanings continuously pointing back toward Allah. Every experience carried a message. Every season contained instruction. Every movement of the soul revealed something about its relationship with its creator. The difficulty is that many people expect divine sufficiency to announce itself dramatically. They imagine that if Allah is enough for them, every problem should disappear immediately. Every uncertainty should vanish. Every prayer should be answered in the exact form they anticipated. When life continues presenting challenges, they assume that divine support must be absent. Yet the language of divine sufficiency speaks differently. It often appears in ways that are quieter than expectation and deeper than immediate understanding. A person asks Allah for strength and notices that they remain standing through a difficulty that should have broken them. A person asks for guidance and finds themselves gradually losing attraction to what would have harmed them. A person asks for relief and discovers that while the external situation remains difficult, their heart is no longer drowning beneath it. The answer has arrived, but not in the form they originally imagined. This is because divine sufficiency does not always remove the experience. Sometimes it transforms the one experiencing it. Ibn Arabi understood that human beings often focus upon visible outcomes because visible outcomes are easy to measure. The heart wants evidence that can be pointed to and explained. Yet, some of the most profound expressions of Allah's care cannot be measured in such simple ways. How does a person measure the disappearance of a fear that once dominated their life? How do they measure the arrival of patience during a season that previously would have produced despair? How do they measure the ability to trust Allah in circumstances that once generated constant anxiety? These changes rarely attract attention from the world. Yet, within the language of divine sufficiency, they carry immense significance. The servant begins discovering that Allah's support is not limited to changing external realities. It also appears through the reshaping of perception itself. The same situation remains. The same uncertainty remains. The same unanswered questions remain. Yet the heart encounters them differently because something within it has changed. The language of divine sufficiency often speaks through subtle redirections as well. A person may feel disappointed by the loss of something they deeply desired. Months later, they realize that the loss protected them from a path that would have created greater difficulty. What seemed painful at first gradually reveals itself as mercy. The message was present from the beginning. The understanding arrived later. This pattern appears repeatedly throughout life. Divine wisdom frequently becomes visible only after enough time has passed for its meaning to unfold. Ibn Arabi viewed this delay in understanding as part of the spiritual journey itself. Human beings are not given complete knowledge because complete knowledge belongs to Allah alone. Instead, they are invited into trust. They learn to walk forward without demanding immediate explanations for every event. The servant becomes more attentive to the hidden language operating beneath ordinary experiences. They begin noticing how often assistance arrives before they ask for it. How often protection appears through unexpected forms. How often guidance emerges through circumstances they initially resisted. How often doors close only to reveal better directions later. These observations gradually transform the heart's relationship with life. Existence no longer appears random. The servant begins sensing traces of divine care woven throughout experiences that once seemed disconnected. This awareness creates a remarkable form of confidence. Not confidence in personal ability, but confidence in the wisdom of Allah. The person realizes they do not need to understand everything immediately in order to trust that Allah understands it perfectly. This realization lies at the center of Hasbiyallahu Wa Ni'mal Wakeel. The phrase is not merely an expression of dependence. It is an acknowledgement that Allah's care continues operating, even when the servant cannot interpret every sign. Divine sufficiency speaks through outcomes, but it also speaks through delays. It speaks through arrivals, but it also speaks through departures. It speaks through provision, but it also speaks through protection. It speaks through visible blessings, but it also speaks through hidden preparations. The servant who learns this language begins experiencing life differently. They become less obsessed with demanding explanations for every event because they trust the wisdom behind events they cannot yet explain. They become less anxious about controlling every outcome because they recognize that Allah's care extends beyond what they can see. Ibn Arabi understood that true reliance grows when the heart becomes fluent in this hidden language. The servant begins recognizing signs of divine sufficiency in places where others see only ordinary circumstances. They begin hearing meanings that are not spoken aloud. They begin noticing mercy hidden inside events that once seemed confusing. And gradually, the phrase Hasbiyallahu Wa Ni'mal Wakeel stops being repeated during moments of difficulty alone. It becomes a lens through which reality itself is viewed. The heart comes to understand that divine sufficiency is not a distant promise waiting somewhere in the future. It is an active reality continuously expressing itself through countless forms, guiding, protecting, teaching, and sustaining the servant even during moments when its presence remains hidden beneath the surface of ordinary life. When circumstances stop defining reality, most people spend their lives allowing circumstances to tell them what is possible, what is safe, what should be feared, and what should be expected. They look at their surroundings and quietly allow those surroundings to shape their understanding of reality. If resources are scarce, they feel limited. If difficulties increase, they feel trapped. If opportunities disappear, they assume hope should disappear with them. The visible world becomes the primary source from which they draw conclusions about their future. This way of seeing life feels natural because human beings live among circumstances every day. They wake up inside them. They interact with them. They are affected by them. Gradually, many people begin treating circumstances as though they possess the authority to determine what can happen next. Yet Ibn Arabi pointed toward a reality far deeper than appearances. He taught that what people see is not the whole of what exists. The visible world is only one layer of a creation sustained continuously by Allah. Beneath every event lies a reality connected to divine wisdom, divine power, and divine knowledge. When a person forgets this, they begin giving circumstances a power they were never meant to possess. Financial difficulty becomes a prediction about the future. A closed door becomes a verdict. A delay becomes a final conclusion. A hardship becomes an identity. The servant slowly begins allowing temporary conditions to define permanent realities. The phrase Hasbiyallahu Wa Ni'mal Wakeel begins dismantling this way of seeing, not by denying circumstances, but by restoring them to their proper place. The person still recognizes challenges. They still acknowledge limitations. They still understand the seriousness of what stands before them. Yet they no longer treat circumstances as the highest authority. Their attention begins moving beyond what is visible toward the one who governs what is visible. This shift is subtle at first. The external world may remain unchanged. The difficulty may remain exactly where it was. The uncertainty may still surround the future. Yet something remarkable begins happening within the heart. The servant stops asking circumstances to explain reality. They stop looking at the difficulty and immediately assuming they know how the story will end. They stop treating appearances as complete evidence. This transformation carries profound consequences because much of human suffering comes not only from events themselves, but from the conclusions people attach to those events. A setback becomes proof of failure. A loss becomes proof of abandonment. A delay becomes proof that nothing is happening. The heart creates interpretations and then lives inside them. Ibn Arabi understood that these interpretations often arise from limited vision. Human beings see a fragment and mistake it for the whole. They witness a single chapter and assume they understand the entire book. Yet Allah sees what remains hidden. He sees the parts of the story that have not yet entered visible existence. He sees connections that have not yet formed. He sees outcomes that remain concealed behind present circumstances. When reliance deepens, the servant begins remembering this reality. A challenge no longer defines what Allah can do. A delay no longer defines what Allah is preparing. A closed path no longer defines where Allah can create an opening. The person becomes less attached to appearances because they recognize that appearances are not the final truth. There is a freedom hidden within this understanding. Many people become prisoners of visible conditions. Their emotions rise and fall entirely according to what they can observe. If circumstances improve, hope increases. If circumstances worsen, hope diminishes. Their inner state becomes controlled by an environment that changes constantly. Reliance breaks this dependency. The servant begins anchoring their understanding in something more stable than changing events. They recognize that divine wisdom remains active, whether they can see it or not. They recognize that Allah's power remains unlimited, regardless of what appears impossible. They recognize that reality extends beyond what the senses can immediately confirm. Ibn Arabi often described existence as a continuous unveiling of meanings already known to Allah. Human beings encounter these meanings gradually. They discover tomorrow what was hidden today. They understand later what seemed confusing earlier. This gradual unveiling teaches the servant humility regarding their own conclusions. The heart becomes slower to despair, slower to assume, slower to judge what Allah may be doing. Immediately interpreting circumstances as final truths, the servant begins leaving space for possibilities that remain unseen. This does not produce passivity, it produces trust. The person continues acting responsibly, but they stop allowing circumstances to dictate the limits of their hope. A remarkable peace emerges from this shift. The servant no longer feels trapped inside present appearances, because they understand that appearances do not possess ultimate authority. The visible world remains important, but it is no longer treated as the complete definition of reality. Reality becomes larger, the horizon becomes wider, the future becomes less confined by current conditions. And through this expansion, Hasbiyallahu Wa Ni'mal Wakeel reveals one of its deepest secrets. The phrase teaches the heart that circumstances are real, but they are not supreme. Challenges are real, but they are not final. Delays are real, but they are not definitive. The visible world carries meaning, but it does not contain the entirety of meaning. When this understanding settles into the soul, something profound changes. The servant continues walking through the same world, yet they no longer see that world through the same lens. Their confidence is no longer determined by circumstances alone. Their hope is no longer limited by appearances. Their trust is no longer dependent upon visible evidence. They begin living from a deeper awareness, an awareness that reality is not defined solely by what the eyes can witness. It is defined by the one who sustains every moment of existence, guides every unfolding event, and remains fully capable of creating possibilities beyond anything present circumstances seem to allow. The door few people realize they have opened. There are certain moments in a person's spiritual life that appear ordinary on the surface yet carry consequences far greater than they realize. Nothing dramatic seems to happen. No visible sign announces the beginning of a new chapter. The world continues moving as it always has. The same responsibilities remain, the same challenges remain, the same uncertainties continue standing before the person. Yet hidden beneath these familiar appearances, a profound change has already taken place. A door has opened. The remarkable thing is that most people do not recognize it when it happens. They continue searching for a future event that will transform their lives, while overlooking a transformation that has already begun within them. This is part of the mystery hidden inside Hasbiyallahu Wa Ni'mal Wakeel. Many people approach the phrase, hoping it will open a door in the world. They hope it will remove a difficulty, resolve a problem, or create a path where none seems to exist. These hopes are understandable. Human beings naturally long for relief and guidance. Yet Ibn Arabi pointed towards something deeper. He understood that before Allah changes the landscape around a person, He often changes the landscape within them. The servant repeats the word sincerely. They may feel no difference. The burden still exists, the uncertainty still exists, the waiting still exists. Yet without realizing it, the heart has begun entering a different relationship with reality. A door has opened between dependence upon circumstances and dependence upon Allah. A door has opened between fear and trust. A door has opened between carrying the burden alone and entrusting it to divine care. The person may not recognize the significance of this change because it happens quietly. Spiritual transformations rarely announce themselves with the same force as worldly events. They often resemble the first light before dawn. The darkness has not completely disappeared, yet something fundamental has already changed. Ibn Arabi often described the spiritual path as a movement from illusion toward recognition. The servant gradually awakes to realities that were present all along. The door opened by Hasbiyallahu Wa Ni'mal Wakeel belongs to this awakening. Before the door opens, the person sees themselves as standing at the center of every struggle. After the door opens, they begin recognizing that Allah was present within every struggle from the beginning. Before the door opens, they believe their peace depends entirely upon outcomes. After the door opens, they begin discovering peace that exists before outcomes arrive. Before the door opens, they view uncertainty as an empty space. After the door opens, they begin understanding that uncertainty can be filled with divine wisdom, even when that wisdom remains hidden. This shift changes far more than emotions. It changes perception. The world remains the same, yet it no longer appears the same. The person begins noticing traces of Allah's care in places they once ignored. Events that seemed random begin carrying meaning. Delays that seemed pointless begin inviting reflection. Difficulties that once appeared hostile begin revealing lessons. The servant becomes more attentive to the subtle movements of divine wisdom operating beneath visible events. This awareness is itself a doorway, not a doorway made of stone or wood, not a doorway leading to a physical destination, a doorway of perception, a doorway through which the soul begins seeing reality with greater depth. What makes this door so precious is that it remains available regardless of circumstances. A person does not need to wait until every problem disappears before entering it. They do not need perfect conditions. They do not need complete understanding. The doorway opens through reliance itself. The moment the heart genuinely accepts that Allah is sufficient, the threshold is crossed. The person may continue facing challenges, but they no longer face them from the same position. Their relationship with those challenges changes because their relationship with Allah has deepened. Ibn Arabi understood that many people spend their lives asking for signs while failing to recognize the greatest sign already unfolding within them. They ask whether Allah is near while the very longing that draws them toward Him is evidence of that nearness. They ask whether their reliance matters while their heart is already being transformed by it. The door opened by Hasbiyallahu Wa Ni'mal Wakeel often remains hidden because it does not always produce immediate outward changes. It produces inward changes first. The servant becomes more rooted, more aware, more trusting, more capable of remaining steady while life continues unfolding according to divine wisdom. These inner changes begin influencing everything else. Decisions become different. Reactions become different. Priorities become different. The person discovers that they are no longer living from the same fears that once controlled them. This is why Ibn Arabi regarded reliance as more than a virtue. He saw it as a state that reveals deeper dimensions of reality. Through reliance, the servant gains access to a way of seeing that remains hidden from the heart dominated by fear and attachment. The extraordinary secret is that many people spend years searching for a door that will lead them closer to Allah, not realizing that the sincere declaration of Hasbiyallahu Wa Ni'mal Wakeel has already begun opening that door from within. The journey does not start when circumstances improve. The journey does not start when every question is answered. The journey begins the moment the heart truly entrusts itself to Allah. That moment may appear small from the outside, yet from the perspective of the soul, it marks the opening of a doorway that leads toward a deeper freedom, a deeper trust, and a deeper recognition of the one who was never distant. And once that door has opened, the servant is no longer merely waiting for Allah's help. They are learning to live within the reality of His sufficiency, step by step, breath by breath, through every season of their journey. Many people spend their lives searching for a door that will change their circumstances, while overlooking the door that changes the heart. Ibn Arabi taught that the deepest secret of Hasbiyallahu Wa Ni'mal Wakeel is not found in the words themselves, but in the state they awaken. The moment Allah truly becomes enough for a servant, something extraordinary begins to shift. Fear loses its authority. Worry loosens its grip. The future no longer feels like a threat that must be controlled. If these words have reached your heart tonight, do not leave them as a phrase. Let them become a reality. The door they open is not somewhere far ahead. It begins the moment you entrust what you cannot carry to the one who was always carrying it.